Let's use a content management system to build this movie voting Next.js application. We've got this awesome homepage that has our movies, and you can vote on which ones you like. Each movie has a detail page, and there's a page to add a movie just by searching on them and then clicking add. And if you're an admin, you can jump to the admin panel to see all the movies along with their posters as well as their media, and look at the media collection itself. And this part right here, the admin panel, we're not going to write a line of code for that. That's all Payload 3.0, which is an open source backend framework that makes it super easy to create applications like this one on top of the NextJS App Router. So it's basically a Next.js native CMS. Payload has support for Postgres and MongoDB, and now Payload 3.0 gives us native support for the App Router. And I got to tell you, if you ask around, a lot of folks, myself included, recommend Payload as their content management system of choice. It's got great database support that's type safe and portable. There's built-in support for media like images and movies. It's got this fantastic admin panel. And it's, as you'll see, really easy to deploy this application to production. Payload's also sponsoring this video, which I certainly thank them for. But I'm only taking that sponsorship because I genuinely think they are a fantastic CMS platform. All right, enough demo and talking. Let's build this Next.js App Router movie voting app. All right, so here's the Payload homepage. Of course, there's a link to that in the description right down below. I am going to give them a star. So I think it is a fantastic project. I encourage you to do the same. So what I'm going to use as the basis for our application is the Payload 3.0 demo app. So let's go get to that GitHub repo. So here's the Payload 3.0 demo. I'm going to go grab the Git URL and I'm going to put that into my terminal. And I'm going to call this Our Favorite Movies and bring that up in VS Code. All right, so as you can see, this follows the structure of a standard Next.js App Router application. Got our source directory over here. Within that, it's got the app directory. Now, within that app directory, there are two route groups. Route groups are denoted by the parentheses around the name of the directory. And in Next.js App Router parlance, the route group is essentially ignored for the URL. So the payload directory has in it the admin/admin route, it's right at the top there. And then our app will go inside the app directory. So this is going to have everything that we build for the front end of the application. Now I'm actually going to get rid of my route there. We don't need that. And let's go and actually connect this to the database. And we're going to use Postgres for our database. So the first thing I want to do is actually start the database. And there's a handy little start database script here that actually uses Docker to get a database started. So let's run that and get our database started. Looks like our database is up and ready to go. Next thing to do is set up the environment variables so that this application can connect to that database. Let's take a look at that. So it's got a connection to Mongo. We don't want that. We're not using Mongo. We're using Postgres. And that's got the correct connection details for that database that we started by using start database. Now you can put in any payload secret you want. I'm just going to keep that as is. So now that we have our environment variables set up, the next thing we want to do is connect to the database and upload our schema. So the schema is located in the payload configuration file. And first thing we're going to do is connect to Postgres. We're going to comment out with the Postgres adapter. We're going to get rid of the Mongoose adapter. And then down here in our config, we're going to enable Postgres and just get rid of the Mongoose adapter. Now, what's the schema going to be? Well, also in this configuration that's specified up on line 30 by build config is the set of collections. The first item in the collection is the list of users. Those are the users that are allowed to access the admin panel. Then, in the case of this Payload 3.0 demo, there's the pages collection. That would be the content that they're managing in this app. We're not going to use that. We're going to replace this with movies, but we'll get there in a second. We just want to see it work first. And then the last collection is media. That's where we put any kind of media that we're going to upload. So that's why it's upload true. All right, let's hit save and then create a migration that's going to migrate this schema into our database. To create that migration, I use the pnpm run command with the payload module, and then I use the migrate create command to create the first migration. So because it's the first, I'm going to call it initial. All right, let's go take a look at what happened. It's created something over in the migrations folder under source. So we'll take a look at that and you can see what it's actually done. This is the migration that goes from 0 to the initial schema. And so it's going to do things like create the table of users, create that pages table, and then create that media table that's going to be where we store references to the media blobs. All right, let's go run this migration. To do that, we go back into our terminal, and then we run that payload module again, but this time just with migrate as the command. And we can see that we're done, we're good. So now at this point, we can run the app. Let's go take a look at localhost 3000, and we see the payload app. Let's go to the admin route. Now it'll ask us to log in. So we log in as the initial user. That's also created in that configuration file. And now we got those collections we saw in that configuration file. We got users, pages, and media. Let's go check out users, and we can see that dev at payload CMS, which is that initial users, is in there. And all of this admin panel comes to you for free out of the box with payload. Awesome. All right, now, as I said, we're not going to deal with pages. We want to deal with movies. So let's go build our own custom collection, and I'll show you how that works. So now in this Payload 3.0 demo, in the payload configuration, we've got the collections, but I actually don't think that's the best place to put them. I'd rather put that in source. So I'm going to go over here to the source directory. I'm going to create a new folder called collections. And then within that, my movies collections. I'll call that movies.ts. And in here, we're going to create the configuration for the movies collection. So that's going to be the movies slug. And then the important part is under fields. So you have the name, the type, and whether it's required or not. So starting from the top, we got a required name. That's the name of the movie. The URL of the movie, that would be what's the URL in the movie database, which is where we're going to get the movie information. The number of votes, you can see that that's a type of number in this case. That's going to define how that's stored in the database. Then you get the really fun one, the poster. So the poster is going to be the poster of the movie. That's going to be an image. So it's going to be an upload. That's the type. So that's going to allow us to upload the poster from the movie database into our own local blob store. And then we got a relation there because that's going to be an ID that then connects to that media table. Then we're going to have some more information we get from the database, the overview of the movie, as well as a tagline and any genres. This is another cool one because genres is an array. So that's going to allow us to have multiple genres, and it's going to actually manage creating a secondary table to manage that, since in a SQL database, to do a one-to-many relationship, you have to have two tables. It's going to do all that for us. It's very cool. Then we're also going to have the slug for the movie. If you're not familiar in CMS parlance, a slug is essentially a friendly name. I don't know why it's called a slug. It's just what we call it. So we're going to go and take the name and then format it into a slug. To do that, we're going to create another function called format slug. In this case, we're going to use a regex to basically turn something like Dune Part 2 into Dune Part 2, like that. This is actually a nice little slug creation helper function. Just grab it and put it into your own app. Totally fine. All right, now let's go bring this movies collection into our app. To do that, we go back into our payload config. We then import that. So we've imported movies collection. Let's now go down and replace the pages collection with that movies collection. All right, now I'm going to do a little bit of extra cleanup here just to make it look nice. I'm going to remove anything we don't actually use. These are a bunch of features that you can add in, really nice, and different rich text editors. I'm just going to use the standard lexical editor, and that looks pretty good to me. So let me hit save. And the next thing we're going to want to do is create a migration to add this new movies table and remove the pages table. To do that, I'll again run that payload command with migrate create, but this time I'm going to give it the name movies since we're adding the movies table. Now let's look at what we got. So it's going to add the movies genre table. It's going to add the movies table. And let's go take a look at that migration. So we can see it creating that movies genre table, as well as the movies table, as well as dropping the pages table and then creating some cool indexes on movie genres to connect it to our movies database. This is really good stuff. This is well-written Postgres code, and you don't have to write it, which is great. All right, let's go run that migration. To do that, again, we run that migrate command off of payload. Now it's telling us because we are removing pages, we're going to have some data loss. We don't have any pages, so that's not a problem. And now we're done. Now let's bring up our app again. And now we can see, if we look over here in the sidebar, that we have the movies collection. Let's go and create a movie. How cool is that? All right, let's add Dune Part 2. Now I'm going to get the URL for that. I'm going to add the URL as well as initialize the votes to 0. And now this is really fun. We're going to upload the media manually. So I'm going to go select a file, that Dune JPEG. Really cool. Hit save. Really nice. All right, now I'll get the overview and tagline. And then I'll add a genre. And notice this is an array. So again, we can have multiples in here if we want. I'm going to call this science fiction. And now as I hit save, notice the slug field over here. The reason that slug got updated is because we used a hook. So let me show you how hooks work. So over in our collection, at the very bottom, with that slug, we use the before validate hook. And what before validate allows you to do is take a look at the current document. In this case, that would be the row that we're creating, and then do anything we want to before it actually gets to the validate phase where we validate the data in there. And that's when we call that format slug. So that's going to take the existing name, Dune Part 2, and then format that as a slug, and that's how it gets in there. So these hooks allow you to go and integrate any code you want into any stage of the object lifecycle as you're reading and updating and deleting data from the database. All right, now that we have our database going, let's go and actually build a UI on top of this thing. Unfortunately, the Payload 3.0 demo doesn't have Tailwind, so we need to install Tailwind, so let's do that right now. So the first thing we're going to do is install Tailwind, PostCSS, and Auto Prefixer. Then we're going to initialize Tailwind. That's going to create a PostCSS config file as well as a Tailwind config.ts file. We need to tell Tailwind where our content is, so in this case, that's under source. This is all just standard NextJS setup stuff. And now because we like shadcn, we're going to use button and input and a couple other things from shadcn. So let's initialize shadcn. Now, the only twist with this is that global CSS is going to be somewhere else. So we look, where is it? Well, it's in the source app. And then within that app route, and then global's SCSS. So I'm going to put that in there, and then I'll just take the defaults. And let's take a look. All right, looks like it did the adjustments. That's great. Okay, we are shadcn good to go. So now let's go and add our controls. We're going to add a button because you always need buttons. A card we're going to use on the home page to show the cards, and then an input control that we use on the ad page, as well as a carousel that we use on the ad page to show the movies. Okay, now to start skinning our application, let's go and add a header to every page. So we'll create a header file. And notice I put that in the app route group. That's a parentheses app. That's because anything you want in your front end application should be in that app route group. Okay, so our header is just going to have our favorite movies as a homepage link, and then add a movie as a link to /add. Now let's go change our layout so we can bring that in. So bring in our header and then add it to our layout. We'll also set it to dark mode because y'all like dark mode, and put everything in the middle of the screen with MX Auto. Let's hit save and see how we go. All right, there we go. We have the stock payload stuff that's now unstyled, but we have our nice header at the top. Cool. So now we want to add that add movie route so we can put the front end on adding a movie. So now where do we get the movie information? Well, we get the movie information from the movie database. There's a link to that in the description right down below. You're going to need a TMDB API key. I already have one. All you need to do is just create an account here and then go to your settings page and create an API key. It's absolutely free. Once you have that key, you're going to want to go back into your .env file, add an environment variable for the TMDB API key, and then just add it in there. I've already got it in my environment, so I'm not going to do that. So now that we're all set up with TMDB, the next thing we need to do is start building out that page. And that page has an input field on it. You type into that input field, and it runs a query against TMDB. So we're actually going to create an API endpoint here that does that work for us. But to make that a little bit smoother, I'm just going to go create some helper functions around movies. So I'll go create a movies directory, and then within that movies directory, an index.ts file. And we'll start off with a search movies function. That'll just take a query string, do a fetch on the movie database, and then return the results to us. All right, let's go create our API endpoint. So once again, in that app route group, I'm going to create a new file under API, search, and then route.ts. This is how you create a route handler and an API endpoint in the NextJS App Router. And then I'm going to export a get function. That get function is going to handle a get request, and we're going to get the query param and then send it on to that search movies, and we should get back a list of movies. So let's try this out. So I'll go back over to my arc. I'll go back to my localhost 3000, do API, search, and then give it a query of Dune. And there we go. Looks like we got good data coming back from our TMDB API endpoint. So now we can go create our ad page. So our ad page is again going to be in that route group. And we'll create a page.tsx file in there. And this is going to be a fully interactive client component. So we'll just do use client at the top. And down in our component definition, we've got state for the query as well as the movies. We've got a use effect that then calls our API endpoint. And then we'll go and use a carousel from shadcn to format the results. Now we do get back a path from the API where we really want a full URL. So we need to implement on this poster URL function. So to do that, I'm going to go back into our movies folder and I'll create a new file in there called utils. And in there, I'll put this handy little function that takes that path and then turns it into a fully qualified URL. All right, let's hit save and see what we get. Okay, cool. So actually, it looks like it might work. Let's try typing in there. Oh, okay. So what's happening here is we get an error from the NextJS App Router. The App Router is telling us that we use the NextJS image tag. And the NextJS image tag says, well, if you use a URL like that, I need to know which hosts you want to be able to run images on. So we need to go and change the NextJS configuration to add that. So we'll go down to our NextJS configuration and we'll add a new key and we'll add an images key and say that we're good with anything that comes from image.tmdb.org. Now let's hit save and try again. Now type in Dune, see what we get. Oh, nice. Okay, looking really good. So now the next thing I want to do is implement on this add function. And to do that, we're going to use a NextJS server action. That's a really cool thing about being built on top of NextJS and its app router. You can use all of these cutting edge NextJS app router features like server actions to make it really easy to add interactivity to your app while still getting the whole power of the CMS and all the data modeling behind the scenes. Okay, so let's go and add an add movie server action. So this is a server action because at the top of the file, we've got use server. So anything in here, if it's exported as an async function, is going to be a server action. So this add movie action will be a server action. It's going to take a movie ID. That's the movie ID that we get from the movie database. It's then going to request all the content that it has about that movie. And from that REST response, it'll get back the title, poster path, overview, all of that stuff. But the really interesting thing is when we want to go and get the poster. So let's take a look at poster. So the first thing we're going to do is take that poster path, get the absolute URL using that handy helper function, that poster URL, and we're going to fetch that. And then from that, we're going to get binary data. That binary data is literally the JPEG, and then we're going to add that JPEG to our media. So how does that work? Because that's generally a serious pain in the butt when it comes to this kind of stuff. Well, it's actually really easy. We use the payload.create function. We give it the collection that we want to add to, in this case, media. We give it any additional text. So we're going to give it the text of Dune Part 2 poster. And then we give it the file. And in this case, we're going to have that poster buffer. That's the data that we get back from that URL endpoint, as well as the name of it, the MIME type, and the size. Interestingly enough, that's the exact same data structure you'd have if you had an upload button in your application. So that's something you can also do. So they've really designed this API to be super friendly. Now, what's going to happen is after we do the payload.create, we're going to get back a poster media object that's going to have the ID on it. Then with that poster media.id, we want to create the movie. So in this case, we do payload.create again, the collection being movies. In this case, that data being everything we got from the REST API endpoint, but also that poster media.id, which we are going to assign to poster, and that's going to connect that movie with that media. All right. The last thing we're going to do is revalidate path. That's a NextJS App Router thing, so that we want to revalidate the home page because we added a movie. All right, let's hit save. Now we need to go over to our ad page and add support for that. To do that, we import that add movie action from movies. Then we wrap that locally in an add movie function that adds that movie and then routes us back to the home page so we can show it. And then finally, we just connect that to our add movie button. Okay, let's give it a try. So if I go over to Dune, I'll add Dune. And now I'm back on the home page. Did it add? I don't know. Let's go find out. Let's use that admin panel. All right, let's take a look at our movies collection. Awesome. We have Dune there. We got a good looking poster. It's got the science fiction genre, adventure. This is fantastic. Awesome. Okay, so next thing to do would be to render this on the homepage. So let's go and create a good looking homepage. So our homepage has a list of movie cards. So I'm going to create a new client component that's going to show those movie cards. Call it movie cards. Now it's a client component because there's going to be a vote button on it. And when you click the vote button, it's going to make a server action request to go and add that vote. So it needs to be a client component. We're also going to get back an updated list of the movies from that vote action because we want to go and update the screen to show that more votes were added, right? So, okay, well, let's now go and add this to the homepage. So we're going to replace that Payload 3.0 demo homepage with a new RSC. That RSC is going to go and connect to Payload. It's going to go and then use the find command to find within the movies collection all of the movies. And then it's going to sort them in descending order using -votes. So the one with the most votes is going to appear at the top. Then it's going to use the movie cards component that we just created. And let's see. Let's go back to our homepage. Fantastic. And again, this is using the best of Next.js. You've got a React server component here. So that database call is being done on the server so seamlessly. And then we've got the server actions that we're using to drive the interactivity. So you're really getting a fantastic development experience here. Okay, so now we do want to enable this vote. So let's go and add a action for voting. Go back into movies again, and we'll add our last server action, and that would be to add a vote. This one's pretty simple as well. We take a movie ID, but in this case, that's our local database ID. We then use a find by ID to go and find that ID. Very simple, nice API from Payload. Then we update the movie in place by just adding a vote. And then we use that same find that we did on the homepage in this action so that when we send the data back to the client, it has a whole new list of movies that it can then update in place. Let's go update the components so that it can do that. To do that, I'm going to rename that add vote server action that we just created. And then down on that button, I'm going to then set the movies, our local movies, to the output of that add vote. All right, let's give it a try. So, excellent. Looks like it's working. Let's see. Dune 1. Ah, this is awesome. That looks really great. The last thing we want to do in our application is build a detail page. So let's do that and wrap up our application and then get it deployed. So I'm going to go click on Dune here, and we can see that the movie Dune, which would be the slug, does not have a route. So let's go create that route. Let's go clean this up. And then over in that app route group, I'm going to create a new file, movie, and then a slug as a parameter, and then page.tsx. And in there will be another React server component. Again, I'll connect to Payload. I'll then go and take the slug out of the route params and then send that on to Payload find. Payload find is going to use that in any where conditions. It's automatically going to create that select for us. Don't have to do any of that. And it's going to get back either the data or nothing. So in this case, if it's nothing, then we use not found. That'll just do the 404. Otherwise, we'll get back one item and then we'll go and format that. So let's hit save and see how we go. Hard to beat that. All right, looks like we have our full application built. We've got our homepage, we've got our admin panel, the whole thing. Now, how do we get it deployed? Well, actually, I have this all set up in the GitHub project associated with this video and a link in the description right down below. Let's go see how to deploy this to Vercel. So in the Payload 3.0 project, right down here, we got our deploy button. Let's hit deploy, and that will automatically log me into Vercel. I'll create a new project. We'll call it Our Movies. We'll create that as a private repo. And now we need it connected to the Postgres database. That's going to be powered by Neon. So just add that automatically. Super cool. And then we need a Blob store. And the Blob store is actually going to be where we put our images. So we just add that. Now, the last thing we need are the two environment variables that are unique to our application, which would be the payload secret. So I'm just going to use OpenSSL to create that. And then I'll put in my TMDB API key, but you're not going to get to see that. And we'll start the deployment. All right, now while that's running, let's go take a look back at the repo. So that was a pretty cool experience, right? That deploy button. Well, that's actually really interesting. Let's go take a look at the source for that deploy button, which would be in the README. So if I look at the raw output here, we zoom in, we can start to see what this URL looks like. So we've got this URL in Markdown format. It's going to go to vercel.com and then an endpoint there called new clone. So new clone is going to basically clone a repo and then build a new Vercel project out of that. So you give it the repo URL, which in this case would be my Jahur Payload 3.0 movies. You give it a recommended project name, our favorite movies. You give it any environment variables that it needs. So in this case, payload secret and the TMDB API key, as well as the build command, as well as any stores you want. So in this case, the stores are going to be Postgres and the Blob store. So if you have an application that could be deployed on Vercel and you want to make it really easy on folks, do something like this. This is a really fantastic way to make applications that are very easy to deploy. All right, one last thing I want to take a look at is the configuration over here in our payload config. And this will show you how to connect to that Vercel Blob store. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So you can see here on line 10, we're bringing in this Vercel Blob storage plugin from the Payload CMS system. And this is already predefined to take all the environment variables that are set up by Vercel to connect this application to the Blob store. And the Blob store is going to be where we put those images. And all you got to do to configure this, it's super easy. I'll show you. Down in the plugin section, I'll say, well, do we have a blob read-write token, which is what Vercel puts in there? And if we do, then initialize Vercel blob storage and give it that token. Otherwise, just don't do anything at all. Keep the local blob storage like we're using in development. That gives you a nice dev mode, production mode switch. Cool. All right, it's probably deployed by now. Let's go take a look. And indeed, it actually is. So let's go over to our app. Let's go to add a movie. Dune, amazing. Hit add. Now you've seen all the rest of it. So I'm just going to go to the admin section and we'll see. Did it add it? Yes, it did. Is it in the Blob store? Yes, it is. So cool, so fast, and such an easy way to deploy your application. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this brief look at Payload. Be sure to hit that starred button. Make sure you're starring their project. It is a fantastic open source toolkit that would definitely help you in making database-driven applications like this. And thank you so much to Payload for sponsoring this video. In the meantime, of course, if you like this video, hit that like button. If you really like the video, hit the subscribe button and click on that bell and be notified the next time a new Blue Collar Coder comes out.